welcome everybody to today's session for the annual forum. My name is Charlotte Coogan, and I'm here with the Nutrition Working Group, and in particular, the SQ-LNS Task Force. Before we get going for that session, let me give you a little bit of background on the scaling community of practice. The SCOP is now in its 11th year. It has grown from about 50 members in 2015 to over 5,000 members today. Everyone is free to join, so please go to our website, which Gabby will put the link in the chat if you're not already a member, and please join. The SCOP is a network of development and climate practitioners and experts who want to learn more about and contribute to the scaling agenda, helping to achieve sustainable impact that matches the scale of global problems today. We have 9 working groups, with nutrition being one of those working groups. The community publishes reports on the scaling experience of its members, including in regular newsletters. It also produces its own knowledge products, which you can find on our website as well. And we organize this annual forum to exchange knowledge on scaling and to promote action. So that's one of the big milestones of this year, is in our current annual forum, we are launching the scaling campaign for 2026 to 2030. This is a collective effort to strengthen the system, standards, and partnerships needed to make transformational scaling the norm across development and climate ecosystems. In our working group sessions, we are reflecting on how scaling works in each of the different sectors and thematic areas, and how you all can contribute to the goals of the scaling campaign. Please join for as many sessions as you can, and especially for our last session on Friday, March 6th, when we're going to summarize the main takeaways from the forum and issue a call to action in support of our campaign. Go ahead and use the chat function to let us know where you're calling in from, to share reflections and ask questions. We're really hoping that that will be an active inline discussion, so our panelists today will reply to the easier questions live in the chat as they're going, and then we will have a Q&A afterwards where we'll have more of a discussion on those complex questions. These sessions are being recorded. We hope that you will share the sessions once they're uploaded with your Francophone and Spanish-speaking colleagues, because they will be translated into French and Spanish once they've been uploaded online. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kay to get going on the session.
Yes, thank you very much, Charlotte. It's my pleasure to start us off on the presentation today. This session will have 3 parts: some historical perspective, and then progress towards achieving scale, and wrapping up with current challenges and opportunities. So I will start off with some background and description of the evidence base for SQ-LNS. We know that there is a global crisis of children's diets in early life, and during their first 2 years, they have extraordinary nutrient needs. As shown on the right, their height increases by 75%, the brain grows to 75% of adult size, more than 1 million new neural connections are formed every second, and body weight quadruples. But unfortunately, most children globally who are under 2 are not fed according to global recommendations. On the right, you can see that 1 in 4 children experiences severe food poverty, which UNICEF defines as intake of only 2 or fewer food groups per day, such as a staple grain, maybe legumes. And on the right, it shows that poor diet and feeding practices early in life lead to stunting and wasting, which are most common in children under 2, stunting being a short height for age, wasting a low weight for height. So infants and young children need a very nutrient-dense diet because of these high nutrient needs for growth and development, but they consume very small amounts of what we call complementary foods. Those are the foods consumed in addition to breast milk if they're still being breastfed. So those complementary foods need to be very high in nutrient density, which is the amount of each nutrient per 100 calories. And the inadequate consumption of nutrient-dense foods can lead to nutrient gaps, which have been documented over many years. Just to illustrate that, I'm showing here some of the challenges to meeting the needs for iron and zinc. This is for children or infants 6 to 8 months of age in 3 countries, where we looked at a model diet that had a 5-food group composition, including some staple grain, legume, green leafy vegetable, egg, and fish or chicken. But even with that diet, it was not possible to meet the needs for bioavailable iron, shown on the left in the figure, or bioavailable zinc. And this is because these infants need very, very large amounts per 100 calories of both of these two nutrients. When you compare them to an adult male, they need 4 times as much zinc and 9 times as much iron per 100 calories. We also know that meeting these nutrient needs at this age is unaffordable for many families around the world. On the figure on the right, this shows the percentage of parents and caregivers who reported barriers to the feeding of young children, with the red dots being a financial barrier. You can see that that is the highest percentage in terms of reported reasons. About 80 to 100% of families report this. And this is because without fortified products, meeting nutrient needs requires a diet that has a high proportion of nutrient-dense animal source foods. And as a result, there's a very high prevalence of iron deficiency, anemia, and other micronutrient deficiencies in this age range. Now, there are a number of options for meeting nutrient needs of breastfed infants and children under 2. The first option, which we always recommend, is dietary diversification and selection of nutrient-rich complementary foods. But as I've just shown you, this is challenging in terms of meeting iron needs in particular, and access and cost are often barriers. So for that reason, fortified products have been developed and evaluated over the years for children under 2, including fortified foods deliberately targeted to infants and young children, or home fortification, which includes the addition of a fortified product to the food prepared in the home. That could be micronutrient powders or what we call complementary food supplements. And one example of that is small quantity lipid-based nutrient supplements, or SQ-LNS. So I'll briefly mention what we mean by SQ-LNS. It's actually a part of a family of lipid-based nutrient supplements that ranges from very small quantity to very large quantity, and they have different purposes from prevention to treatment. Most of you are probably familiar with RUTF, ready-to-use therapeutic food for treatment of severe wasting, usually starting off with a dose of about 1,000 calories, whereas on the left, the dose of SQ-LNS is about 1/10 of that, much, much smaller amount, because it is designed for prevention and not for treatment. Now, it is a small quantity on purpose. On the left, it describes the fact that it contains all of the micronutrients in a dose of about 1 recommended dietary allowance, along with the energy, protein, and essential fatty acids, usually based on some sort of legume like peanut, milk powder, and oil, rich in omega-3 fatty acids. But there are other formulations that have been used in different settings. And this is designed to fill nutrient gaps that are commonly found in complementary feeding diets. And the ration size is small in order to avoid displacement of breast milk and other nutrient-rich foods available in the home, and to ensure that the entire ration and the full dose of the micronutrients can be consumed each day, and to minimize cost. I'd like to walk you through a little bit of the history of how we arrived at SQ-LNS as the most efficacious option for this purpose. Many studies have been done over the years by different groups, and I'll just be reporting on initially what we did at UC Davis to directly compare some of the options that might be used. And this was between 1997 and 2007. So there were 2 studies in Ghana that we designed. The first one was to compare traditional enhanced and fortified complementary foods given to breastfed infants. And we started with a product called Weenie Mix at the time. It was being promoted by UNICEF, which was a maize soybean groundnut blend. But we also tried Weenie Mix that was fortified with vitamins and minerals, Weenie Mix with a 20% addition of fish powder, and then a traditional food used in Ghana called cocoa, a fermented maize, also with 20% fish powder. And what we found briefly is that only the fortified product, which we labeled WM in this figure, reduced iron deficiency and vitamin A deficiency, shown in the bar at 12 months for the WM group being lower than at 6 months, whereas in the other three groups, the prevalence of iron and vitamin A deficiency went up. We also found that the babies didn't consume the whole ration of that food. And so we decided to do another trial to look at the efficacy of home fortification with smaller amounts of a fortified product added to foods available in the home. And this was a randomized trial with about 300 breastfed infants who received either a micronutrient powder, a crushable tablet, or SQ-LNS. And they were compared with a non-intervention group. All three types of home fortification were well accepted, and all of them improved iron status, but only SQ-LNS improved growth. In fact, in that study, we did not observe any growth faltering between 6 and 12 months of age, which is unusual. The prevalence of anemia was reduced from 32% to 10%, and the percentage of infants able to walk by themselves at 12 months of age was doubled from 25% to 49%. And keep in mind that the norm at 12 months of age is that 50% of infants are expected to be walking independently. So this is part of why we ended up pursuing SQ-LNS as the most efficacious option for the kinds of effects that we were looking for. And in the next phase, from 2008 to 2019, the evidence base for SQ-LNS was dramatically increased. One of the projects implemented in that time, which we led here at UC Davis, was called the ISLANDS Project, the International Lipid-Based Nutrient Supplements Project, funded by the Gates Foundation. And in this project, we had a number of objectives, including developing new formulations for different target groups, including pregnant and lactating women, and then conducting 4 randomized controlled trials in 3 different countries to examine various questions. Also to investigate the economic dimensions of SQ-LNS for prevention. And lastly, to coordinate efforts, build capacity, and use the results to inform nutrition policy and programs through something we called the LNS Research Network at the time. And that stimulated a variety of other trials to be done during this same time period. And so by the end of this phase, we ended up with quite a number of different trials that made it possible to conduct meta-analyses, including individual participant data meta-analyses, which were conducted between 2019 and 2021. I won't go into all the details of those. They have been published, but in total, we examined 14 trials that included 9 countries and more than 37,000 children. This made it possible to look at many different outcomes, as well as which groups might benefit the most from this intervention. And so in the next few slides, I'll show you the average effect across all of these trials in several different domains. This one shows effects on growth and mortality. We had reductions in stunting and wasting, a large reduction in severe wasting, reductions as well in underweight, low middle arm, upper arm circumference, and a 27% reduction in all-cause mortality at this age, which was quite impressive and important. In this slide, I'm showing the impact on anemia and micronutrient status, with very large effects on iron deficiency anemia, with a reduction of 64%, and vitamin A deficiency, with a reduction of 56%. And then finally, for child development, we found reductions in delayed development in 3 different domains for language, motor development, and socio-emotional development. Now, as I mentioned, we did look at which groups responded or benefited most from the intervention. We looked at quite a number of study level characteristics as well as individual level characteristics shown here. And all of those results are reported in the papers. But on the right, you can see that in general, there were benefits across nearly all strata of community level, household level, and individual level characteristics. In other words, all children do have an opportunity to benefit. We did find that in certain subgroups, there might have been greater effects on certain outcomes. For example, in households with a lower socioeconomic status in terms of development, communities with a higher stunting burden, communities with poorer wash conditions, particularly with the effects on severe wasting, and in households with more severe food insecurity in terms of certain outcomes. So we concluded on the right that targeting on the basis of population level, socioeconomic status, or burden of undernutrition is worth considering. But such settings are also associated with a greater risk of infection or inflammation, which means that it's important to consider co-packaging with other complementary interventions such as WASH or other mechanisms to reduce the impact of those factors. And I'd like to just sum up at the end here before turning over to mention that this is only part of a much bigger picture. SQ-LNS is not intended as a standalone intervention, and it's not a magic bullet by itself. It needs to be integrated into a core package of interventions with a minimum on the left of robust communication with caregivers, counseling and support for breastfeeding, and promotion of diverse, nutritious diets. And on the right, there are many different delivery platforms that could be utilized for scaling up SQ-LNS, and that's something that our next speaker will touch upon. So turning it over to you, Christine.
Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Christine McDonald, and I'm help coordinate the work of the SQ-LNS Task Force, and I'm happy to share some of the milestones and achievements towards scaling up the implementation of SQ-LNS for the prevention of child undernutrition. Kay gave a really nice overview of the evidence base behind SQ-LNS, and in 2021, that evidence base led to the inclusion of SQ-LNS in the Lancet series on maternal and child nutrition's list of evidence-based interventions to improve child nutrition. In 2022, SQ-LNS was included in the Child Nutrition Fund. Christine Stewart will be giving some examples of how that has led to the scale up of SQ-LNS in selected countries, but SQ-LNS really is one of the few nutrition commodities that has been included in the Child Nutrition Fund. Also in 2022, we held a convening of stakeholders in Washington, D.C., which really kind of kick-started the formation of the SQ-LNS Task Force. At the convening, the results of the different IPD analyses were shared, and efforts were made to form working groups that would focus on different aspects of the scale-up of SQ-LNS. In 2023, SQ-LNS was included in the Copenhagen Consensus Halftime Report, which focused on nutrition and demonstrated a benefit to cost ratio of 13.7 to 1. Also in 2023, we published a correspondence piece in Nature Food, which really called for the scale up of SQ-LNS to improve child nutrition and save child lives. In 2023, SQ-LNS was included in 2 new WHO guidelines, one that focused on complementary feeding and a second that focused on the prevention and management of wasting. Also in 2023, Innovations for Poverty Action listed SQ-LNS as one of their best bets for improving development. And then in 2024, the World Bank's Investment Framework for Nutrition included SQ-LNS as one of the top interventions for investment based on its cost effectiveness. So all of these different milestones and achievements really helped move the needle and kind of generate support for the scale up of SQ-LNS in settings where child undernutrition is high. In collaboration with Dr. Navide Nouri at the Institute for Disease Modeling, we conducted a heat map analysis to identify priority countries where the scale up of SQ-LNS should be prioritized. And identified different criteria kind of for ranking countries in terms of their priority. So we focused on the mortality rate among children 6 to 23 months of age, as well as the prevalence of stunting and wasting. And you can see this heat map shows the darker countries is where the kind of that score was highest, and those would be kind of high priority countries for scale. The SQ-LNS Task Force has also generated some operational guidance to really guide the design and implementation of programs that include SQ-LNS for the prevention of child undernutrition. This can be downloaded from our website, but the goal was really to provide that practical guidance for both policymakers and program managers. It includes some case studies that highlight different kind of context specific considerations that should be accounted for when designing and implementing and monitoring and evaluating different programs. So I have just a couple of slides that provide a little bit of information about the task force. The SQ-LNS Task Force has a goal of catalyzing efforts to scale up SQ-LNS for the prevention of undernutrition. Right now, we are focusing specifically on children 6 to 23 months of age in nutritionally vulnerable settings. We have a variety of different working groups that focus on specific topics. So for example, there's a cost and cost effectiveness working group, an operational guidance working group, an operational research working group, as well as supply and regulatory issues working group. And through those different working groups, we really aim to collate, further develop and disseminate the technical and operational guidance that's needed to support program implementers. We also provide technical assistance for the design, monitoring, and evaluation of programs that integrate SQ-LNS into different delivery platforms. We facilitate operational and implementation-based research that's focused on sort of high priority policy relevant questions. We're working to identify strategies to improve cost effectiveness. And then, of course, we advocate, communicate, and raise awareness for the inclusion of SQ-LNS in programs to reduce child undernutrition. There are a number of different organizations which participate in the task force, either as part of the steering committee or on one of the different working groups. I won't list them all, but they're shown here. It's a really nice group, a very kind of multidisciplinary group that includes representatives from UN agencies, government organizations, non-governmental organizations, different foundations, and academic or research institutions. And I just wanted to highlight a few of our key resources, which are all available on the SQ-LNS website. The website address is shown at the bottom of this slide, and all of these are freely available for download off of the website. We have a couple of policy briefs, one that just provides some kind of high-level background information on SQ-LNS. Another more recent brief has focused on how SQ-LNS for prevention can be aligned with treatment of child wasting among children 6 to 23 months of age. There's a technical brief that focuses on costs and cost effectiveness. Information briefs that highlight the inclusion of SQ-LNS in the WHO guidelines that I mentioned, as well as the inclusion of SQ-LNS in the World Bank Investment Framework. And then the operational guidance document that I showed, which provides operational guidance for programs. So I think I'm going to pause here and I'll hand it over to Christine Stewart.
So my name is Christine Stewart, and I'm a professor at UC Davis in the Institute for Global Nutrition, and have been very active with SQ-LNS, with the SQ-LNS Task Force since its creation. So Kay and Christine have done an excellent job providing an overview of where we've been, and I'd like to now turn to a discussion of what we see as some of the current challenges, as well as the opportunities to continue to make an impact. So the two biggest challenges that we're currently seeing all relate to these two big picture issues, financing and fragmentation. And I'm going to go through each of these in turn. So first, on the financing front. Now, it should be no surprise to probably most of you in this audience that there has been really a tectonic shift in global development funding, which has significantly impacted nutrition programs. So with this constriction in resources, there has been a more narrowed focus on life-saving treatment of wasting. And this is understandable. Even in good times, funding for prevention of disease has always been a harder sell. But we think that now it's even more of an acute challenge. So the question is it worth investing in an intervention like SQ-LNS? Is it cost effective? We think that this under attention to prevention is a missed opportunity. As Christine McDonald mentioned, we produced this technical brief about 2 years ago, reviewing the evidence from 6 different country studies that looked at the costs and cost effectiveness of SQ-LNS programs. And in most of these settings, we found that SQ-LNS delivery could be integrated into existing delivery platforms to leverage human resources, share overhead, training, and supervision costs. And given the strong evidence of benefits, a separate analysis conducted for the Copenhagen Consensus SDG halftime report found that if SQ-LNS were targeted to the poorest 60% of the population in 40 countries with the highest rates of child stunting, the benefit to cost ratio of 13.7 to 1 was quite favorable. Now, in our analysis, we found that the cost per DALY, or disability adjusted life year averted, ranged a fair bit between these 4 country contexts shown here. So they ranged from $253 per DALY to $1,186. And there were higher costs per DALY in one of the more less efficient programs in Burkina Faso. But in the more efficient programs, the cost per DALY averted was less than the GDP per capita, which is a benchmark that suggests that the programs can be delivered very cost effectively. Overall, we found that the total average cost for the programs that we reviewed was roughly $50 per child year, with roughly 60% of that cost allocated to the product itself, and the other 40% of the cost allocated to program delivery and management costs. This $50 per child year, though, is expensive when we consider the scope of the problem and the scale with which it might be delivered. And so that may be just overall out of reach for health or nutrition programs with significantly constrained budgets. So even though this may be a cost-effective program, it could be costly to deliver at wide scale. So a current question is, how can we further reduce that cost number and thereby make that 13.7 to 1 ratio even better? So there's a lot of work underway to consider potential opportunities to bring costs down. So there are some supply-side efficiencies that could be considered to reduce costs. For example, there's ongoing research into new packaging designs that might reduce costs and also enable more producers of RUTF to potentially add SQ-LNS to their production lines. There's also an expansion in the number of producers who are able to produce SQ-LNS, which could lead to some efficiencies of scale and a shifting of production to local enterprises. Local producers may have some competitive advantages to provide the products with lower transport costs and possibly improved procurement timelines. However, many local producers do still struggle because they are often sourcing their ingredients on the international markets, and they may face import taxes or higher interest rates or limited access to quality assurance testing laboratories. So local production is not entirely a panacea for reducing costs, but there may be very good reasons to invest in local production nevertheless. On the delivery side, there are also ways to potentially reduce costs and improve efficiency. So targeting may be an option to direct the program towards those most likely to benefit. Some countries are considering distribution in districts that are considered high risk of stunting or wasting. There may also be greater benefits if the products could be targeted to the youngest children, starting supplementation at 6 months of age. Some programs are choosing to deliver supplements for shorter periods of time also. But we would caution that at the moment, the evidence is not yet there to know if we can expect similar benefits if less supplementation is provided. We do think that this is an important area for research, though, and we hope to do continued work on this going forward. And lastly, there may be efficiencies that could be gained with careful logistics and planning to optimize procurement to align with the actual coverage, thereby minimizing wastage. Another opportunity for improving efficiency is to think creatively about strategic integration of SQ-LNS into different types of delivery platforms. To date, we have the greatest evidence from community health programs or delivery through health systems. But there's also a lot of interest in integrating SQ-LNS into social protection programs to reach the most vulnerable households. So in general, there is flexibility in how governments or NGO programs may choose to deliver SQ-LNS. There's also some emerging evidence that SQ-LNS could serve as an incentive. In Bangladesh, for example, community health workers were more likely to hold meetings with women's groups when they had SQ-LNS to provide. In other settings, we've seen that a greater number of caregivers will come to a health post to receive their supplements. And this could enable greater uptake of wasting screening, infant and young child feeding counseling, or uptake of other child health services, such as vaccinations. So if done strategically, this integration could create win-wins for nutrition and other goals. And we're hopeful that this could potentially unlock some co-financing for nutrition with other sectors. Now, a natural program integration strategy is within wasting prevention and treatment programs. So SQ-LNS itself will improve nutrient intake and reduce micronutrient deficiencies, but it also may serve as an incentive, as I mentioned, an incentive for coming in to receive infant and young child feeding counseling. And taken together, this may therefore reduce the incidence of wasting as well as child mortality, as we've seen in our meta-analyses. In addition, the delivery of SQ-LNS may incentivize caregivers to bring their children into a health post or to meet with community health workers to get screened for wasting, thereby improving access to treatment and earlier provision of wasting care. And then lastly, another emerging area of interest is the potential utilization of SQ-LNS for children who have recovered from wasting treatment. And the hope is that SQ-LNS could lead, delivery could lead to a greater likelihood of sustained recovery from wasting and a reduced risk of relapse. Some of our partner organizations who are members of the SQ-LNS Task Force, the IRC and ACF, both have studies underway to examine this question. Another potentially interesting area of emerging research is to evaluate whether SQ-LNS can serve as an incentive for uptake of vaccinations. Alima is leading research on this topic in Yobe State in Nigeria. And this study will look primarily at the measles vaccine uptake, as well as other routine vaccinations. And this, we think, is a really exciting area for research. And the study is co-funded by the Eleanor Cook Foundation and Gavi. And we're expecting results to be released imminently in the next couple of months. Now, thus far, I've talked primarily about potential ways to deliver SQ-LNS more efficiently. I also want to highlight an important and relatively new financing mechanism to support the procurement of SQ-LNS by countries. So UNICEF, together with a number of major donors, has launched what is called the Child Nutrition Fund in 2023. And SQ-LNS is one of the core commodities that countries can purchase by leveraging this financing mechanism. There's three funding channels that are called windows. The program window is a mechanism to coordinate global investment to countries without necessarily a requirement for a domestic funding match. The match window mobilizes a one-to-one match between domestic and donor funding to support procurement of essential nutrition supplies. These two financing mechanisms are the larger parts of the program. The third is called the supplier window, which supports local manufacturers to produce essential nutrition commodities such as RUTF, MMS, or multiple micronutrient supplements. and SQ-LNS. So far, there have been a handful of countries that have already taken advantage of this opportunity. For example, Nigeria and Burkina Faso have used the funding from the match window, while Benin and Cote d'Ivoire are accessing funding through the program window. And this is an example of the reach that the CNF has reported for procurement. This is just through the match window, not the program window. And from here, you can see that while RUTF is the primary commodity that is being procured through this mechanism, SQ-LNS is also being increasingly selected. Now, I just want to say a couple words about Nigeria, the experiences in Nigeria. It's an early adopter of the Child Nutrition Fund as a financing mechanism. So in 2021 to 2022, Nigeria implemented a large pilot program in Gombe State as part of the Child Wasting Innovation Program. And there was a lot that was learned through this pilot experience. And in 2025, the government decided to implement a programmatic scale-up with an ambitious goal to reach 2 million children. The program involves coordination with UNICEF and the Child Nutrition Fund, as well as a number of local partners. And SQ-LNS is being delivered as part of this program and targeted to high-risk communities using a targeting tool. And they've decided to prioritize the purchase of SQ-LNS from local producers in Nigeria. And from what we understand, well, work on the scale-up is already underway, and the actual distribution of SQ-LNS, from what we understand, should begin pretty soon in the next couple of months. Now, turning to the second major challenge, which is fragmentation. This is also an important bottleneck right now, is fragmentation and the potential lack of coordination. Now, along with the financial challenges of the past year, leading technical organizations are undergoing significant restructuring. This creates some major risks, the potential loss of technical expertise and leadership, and potential stalled momentum. In addition, so much change all at once has made it difficult to coordinate and maintain good communication, which risks creating inefficiencies. While country governments need to be in the driver's seat when it comes to decision making, without access to evidence-based guidance, there is a risk of repeating mistakes of the past or reinventing the wheel. There's also the potential for overlap where multiple organizations working on similar things in an uncoordinated way could yield inefficient duplication of efforts. So we believe there's a need for an organization like the SQ-LNS Task Force, which is a coalition of multiple organizations, to facilitate strategic coordination, communication, and continued research on topics that are of importance to the global community. So I've listed some of our priorities here. They have evolved over time as we've tried to assess what is of greatest good to the global community. In the upcoming 1 to 2 years, we're working on a number of fronts to address the challenges that I've highlighted. And I'm listing activities that are being done both by the SQ-LNS Task Force Secretariat as well as by members of our consortium. So on the cost and financing fronts, there's a lot of research underway or upcoming. Some of our partners have been investigating these alternative packaging designs that could improve production efficiency. We're studying the potential benefits of lower cost, shorter duration supplementation options. As I mentioned, some of our consortium members are studying integration of SQ-LNS into wasting treatment or together with vaccine delivery. We're also aiming to strengthen our connections with the Child Nutrition Fund, since this is becoming an increasingly important financing mechanism. On the coordination front, we are working on a number of activities. We're developing 3 case studies on lessons learned using different delivery platforms. We're also working to coordinate with implementing organizations to develop monitoring and evaluation guidance for SQ-LNS programs. And finally, we're trying to think strategically about how SQ-LNS may fit into food systems and food security programs. So that is my last slide. I'll finish it here. And thank you all so much for listening. And I've noticed many questions in the chat, and I'm looking forward to a good discussion. Please feel free to keep posting your questions in the chat, and we'll be happy to take them now. I think we'll take down the slides, and I'd like to invite my co-presenters to turn the videos back on. Thank you. So maybe I could turn it over to Kay. I haven't been looking at the chat questions so much, but maybe if you'd like to get us started.
Yeah, sure. So I tried to post a few answers to some of the initial questions. One of them was, what do we mean by scale up of SQ-LNS, and how would we know if it has been achieved? And I guess I would say we're at early stages of the scaling up process, because it's been relatively recently that this intervention's been listed as one of the high priority interventions. So the task force itself has not set any goals for what it means to see scaling up. The individual countries that are doing this, for example, through the Child Nutrition Fund, have their own goals depending on their needs and the resources available to them. And then the World Bank Investment Framework for Nutrition had 3 different models of what scaling up could look like for all the interventions that they were modeling, based on either existing funding, a 25% increase in funding overall, or a 50% increase in funding overall. And those seem a little out of reach at the moment, given the global funding situation, but longer term, those are useful to look at, because as you shift to greater funding availability, the prioritization of different interventions shifts a bit. So I recommend that you look at the chapter 7 of that report if it's of interest to you. I can pause there and see if Christine would like to add further on what do we mean by scaling up?
No, I mean, Kay, I think you've done an excellent job with that. I think you made the point in the chat that the goals for each individual country are going to be different. And so what scale looks like in one country may look very different than what it looks like in a different country. And I think that may kind of lead into the second question that Todd had brought up, which is what are we doing to support systems change so that host country governments can provide SQ-LNS on their own and not require external aid. So I think there's a few ways that we're trying to think about this. One is in the development of this technical guidance. So for example, the operational guidance report that Christine McDonald mentioned, we've produced that in both English and French and have shared that on our website and through webinars, through the M&E guidance, through a number of the different kinds of research briefs and technical briefs. So this could enable a local country, like a country government, to take that information and apply it in a more practical way. The case studies, I hope, will also give implementers at the country level some ideas of how things maybe worked in a different setting, or what lessons could be learned from what worked well and what didn't work so well in other similar types of settings to their own. Another important area is this potential opportunity on the supply side. If there can be an improvement in the way that SQ-LNS can be produced, it could reduce a bottleneck that some producers have for opening up a new line to produce SQ-LNS. So this is why the packaging format is really important, is because if an alternative design is acceptable to consumers, to caregivers, to children, it works well within programmatic context, then it may offer an opportunity for more local producers to start producing SQ-LNS, again, which could make it easier for for countries to take up the SQ-LNS programs. So I think that there's those different ways that we're thinking about making it easier for countries to implement SQ-LNS programs with less of a need for external assistance. And we're happy to learn also from other groups or other organizations about what has worked well for other types of interventions or different types of commodities.
There was also a question from Johannes about targets. And Johannes, I wonder if you could maybe rephrase your question. If you're talking about the reductions in adverse outcomes that I was showing on the slides, stunting, wasting, et cetera, those are all relative reductions in the intervention group compared to the control groups, not in terms of any kind of baseline necessarily, just how much was it reduced compared to the control group. But perhaps you could ask your question again.
Sure. Thanks very much. I guess in part, in the previous answer, you did respond already, maybe indirectly, but what we have in mind when we talk about longer term targets is that you really have to have a sense of where you're going and how far are you coming relative to where you think you need to end up to address the problem that you are pursuing, the solution to which you're pursuing through your scaling approach. But what we find commonly is that scale impact is measured purely in terms of, okay, I've added another 100 people or 100,000 people, but not in relationship to actually what is the target group. Is it 1 million, is it 5 million, and whatever. Actually, the target group may actually increase over time for whatever reason. And so you may actually fall short in relative terms, even though in absolute terms you're making progress in scaling up. So we really have to, I think, always think about not just in terms of, so yeah, we're doing better than we used to, but actually, are we doing well enough relative to whatever scale goal we've set? And so my question to you was really, when you look at this, especially at the country level, are you looking against some kind of a goal that you think is where you think the country needs to end up in order to have a reasonably satisfactory outcome in the areas in which you're trying to achieve impact? I don't know whether that's any clearer, but that's as best I can do right now. Thank you very much. And by the way, thanks for a wonderful event. It's great to learn about what you're doing.
Well, thank you. Yes, that description that you gave is precisely how the nutrition targets globally are set up. There are expected rates of reduction in prevalence of stunting, wasting, and anemia, although the anemia target is for women, not for children. And each country is graded basically on how much they are achieving the expected rate of reduction based on their circumstances. And we can say that many countries are falling short. In the last update to progress on the global targets, that was the case. And so a lot more needs to be done to understand why they are not on track and what else needs to be done. There was an extension of the targets to 2030. Originally, they were set for 2025. And the targets for 2030 are coming up very quickly. There is a discussion about what to do after 2030 with regard to targets. And I think all of us need to participate in that and make sure that it is based on individual level country situation and what's achievable for those countries. There's a debate about whether to make targets very aspirational, meaning we really want 0 for these outcomes, or to make them more achievable, but perhaps less aspirational, so that countries don't get discouraged from some progress being made that's not close to what the desired level would be.
Maybe I could also speak to your point about, Johannes, your point about the trying to track effectively program reach relative to the need. And this is this has been a challenge over the past couple of years. in 2024, we were working as a task force to develop an indicator or potentially set of indicators that could be incorporated into the DHS surveys. And we actually had done a lot of work and proposed an indicator for monitoring the reach of SQ-LNS programs. And if it had been incorporated in and proposed it at the time, but then shortly after, as many in our audience would know, the DHS survey shut down for a period of time, and it's come recently back open, but we're not sure if there will be future opportunities in the near term to, again, consider the incorporation of new indicators. But with something like DHS, that would enable us to see, to estimate, what proportion of children are being reached, but also to potentially look at subgroups. I think another potential mechanism that we're considering is whether indicators of SQ-LNS distribution or use could be incorporated into health information systems that various countries have already developed. Again, that's useful, but it's also we're trying to think through what that information tells us and what it doesn't tell us, because we can look at proportions of children or numbers of children reached who actually come into the health system, but we don't get as much information about the children who are not coming into the health system. So these different types of data sources can help us to track reach among specific target groups. But you're absolutely right. Like you also kind of brought up the point about the scope of the problem may shift in different countries over time, and so that's something where I think going forward in the future, there's a need for more discussion at the country level to really identify what the goals are and how they might define success, which is something that we haven't done yet. We started to do it at a kind of big picture level, like what Christine McDonald had shown with our heat map analysis. But I think the next step is drilling down to more specifics at the country level and subnational level within countries that are interested.
There is another question about how the task force uses coordination in the chat. I wonder, Christine McDonald, if you would like to respond to that?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a great question and a really important one. I think one of the key ways that we really do emphasize coordination and communication is through our steering committee. So the steering committee consists of representatives from a number of different organizations, and we meet on a monthly basis. And it's an opportunity for everyone, all of the different organizations, to share information about what programs are being planned, or to share relevant updates regarding SQ-LNS. Also an opportunity to identify ways that groups can collaborate and share information and make sure that we're not duplicating efforts. So that's an important way. Amongst all of the members of our task force, we have, each of the different working groups meet regularly. We have listservs where everyone is kind of kept up to date on key activities that the task force is pursuing. And yeah, I think those are the primary ways. We really do try to communicate as with all members of the task force, and also externally as much as possible.
And in terms of the country platforms that Johannes mentioned in the chat, there are a number of similar kinds of efforts being supported by the Scaling Up Nutrition movement, the SUN movement. Many countries have a SUN core group that reflects various organizations and works jointly to meet the kinds of goals for that country. So that's definitely a relevant platform for what we're aiming at as well. But it may go beyond that, as Christine Stewart mentioned, integration into the broader health system, for example, for immunization delivery it means a larger platform than just the nutrition sector. So I think we're still working on how that might look.
And I think another thing I'm thinking of, I'm looking at Charlotte's question about, are there leverage points where coordination allows better outcomes than if each group had gone it alone? And another example of what we have tried to do is identify opportunities where we can be co-hosting or co-organizing events to be communicating with a broader audience. So for example, we've co-organized webinars and technical discussions when we presented the operational guidance document. I believe we had co-hosted that with the Emergency Nutrition Network, because we know that that network reaches a somewhat different audience than may be reached through the SQ-LNS Task Force's network. We also try to stay in close coordination with the Complementary Feeding Collective that is organized by UNICEF and WHO, because all of us here, I mean, although the topic of today's conversation is around SQ-LNS, we all firmly believe in the value of overall diet quality, dietary diversity, and improved complementary feeding practices. So we want to make sure that we're well aligned with those groups as well. So those are just two specific examples, but whenever possible, we try to think about not just how we can broadcast our information and messages to, our friendly audience. That also, yeah, Diana raised in the chat also the core groups nutrition working group. We have coordinated with them as well in the past to do a webinar. So I think that these are great examples of where we can expand our reach and ability to communicate to diverse audiences, and that helps us all, I think.
There's also a question from Natalia about reducing cost of implementation, and I know Christine Stewart covered a fair bit of that. I think just to kind of recap a little bit, one of the key elements is understanding how to target the intervention to those who need it the most. We're sort of in the unfortunate situation that this intervention actually could benefit so many children in so many countries that people feel overwhelmed by the potential target group. So reducing which one is being prioritized is one of the key elements. But the other one that she touched on is the duration of use. So the cost estimates presented here of about $50 per year per child are for 12 months of supplementation. If you reduce that to 6 months, and we would prioritize the age between 6 and 12 months of age, then you cut that cost by almost half. And so that becomes a lot more achievable. And then the third is the proportion of total costs that are represented by the product or for non-product costs. And we know that that varies by the delivery system dramatically. So, for example, in the system in which this has been incorporated into an immunization health post kind of platform, the non-product costs are very small, 10 to 20% perhaps, because it's already got all of the elements that are needed apart from the product and a little more training and service delivery. So that's another part of the equation that helps make this more affordable. So I hope the others can chime in if they like.
Yeah, thanks, Kay. I think I don't have anything to add onto that response. I thought maybe I would just say something briefly in response to, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Bezawit, about local production. So the question is what support can be provided to local manufacturers of RUTF and RUSF who have technical capacity to produce SQ but who have not started production due to the absence of confirmed orders. What strategies or recommendations do you suggest to help these manufacturers initiate LNS SQ production and generate demand? So I think this is a faceted question. So if these producers are already a part of, there's a network of producers, the Plumpy Field Network, that does help support local producers to expand their production into SQ-LNS. It is a bit more technically challenging than it is for RUTF and RUSF, so it's important to approach it with with care. But I also think that maybe Kay, would you want to say a couple words about thinking about generating demand and what kinds of things we're interested in studying in the next upcoming years?
Yeah. So, given how critical the sort of funding situation is and how countries and markets are already moving, we've been exploring what the pros and cons might be of having SQ-LNS be available for direct purchase by consumers in various countries. And one model that could potentially be used is that production or the product that is sold directly could then be used to subsidize the cost of providing it for free or reduce cost to those who cannot afford it. We're trying to understand how these models have worked in the past for other products, including other nutritious products, because there are many pitfalls in the private sector becoming involved in these products. With that said, the private sector already is entering this space. There are knockoff products for SQ-LNS in various countries, for example, Bangladesh, that are not meeting the nutritional or other standards that are present for SQ-LNS, but are being marketed as if they have the same benefits. So we're quite worried about knockoff products, not only not being helpful, but potentially being harmful if they have, for example, contamination with aflatoxin or other things that could be harmful. So we're working on how that larger picture of including both the private sector and the public sector distribution models could operate in an ideal situation. And in the longer term, hopefully conduct pilot projects where this occurs in a country that has the right circumstances for achieving that. So that would actually go a long way towards generating demand if the marketing of the product available for purchase is done properly and well, and then is used to make the business model for the producers more stable and more predictable. Right now, producers that make RUTF or any of these products are pretty much at the mercy of the financing going into commodities that are provided for free. And that has been a wildly fluctuating circumstance, which is difficult for companies to tolerate. And so another factor in that is diversification of their product lines. And I would say including products for both treatment and prevention is part of diversification. Also products for not just young children, but for pregnant lactating women is potentially part of diversification. So we're actually very eager to have economists become even more involved in the task force to help us understand all of these issues, which are quite large.
I might also just add that the 7-day packagings is another potential way that producers that may have historically been focused on RUTF production can more easily diversify their kind of production to include SQ-LNS. So there's new kind of research being conducted to evaluate a 7-day package of SQ-LNS that would be an entire week's worth of the supplement in a larger package, and that product could be more easily produced on the production lines that are used for RUTF. So I think that's kind of an encouraging opportunity for more producers to become involved in the production of SQ-LNS as well.
And I see Natalia has a follow-up question on the cost of service delivery and implementation. This is a topic that we would love to learn more about from the actual implementing organizations. Towards that end, we are trying to develop a template for costing all of the elements of delivery so that organizations can compare how others are achieving that and make sure that they're documenting all of the costs, not just the product cost, but what goes into providing a storage facility, for example, or the transport from some central depot out to the further reaches. So as I mentioned, there's a wide range in the non-product cost part of this. Organizations that are already well established in remote communities have a big part of the answer to that question. How did they achieve that? Who are they working with in those more remote areas? Because the health sector often has trouble reaching those populations adequately. So choices are try to bring that population in to a more central health post, which is desirable in terms of the services that can be provided to them, but also recognizing that coming in frequently, if you live very far away, is not that feasible. So some combination of service delivery at the community level, as well as at more central health clinics, is probably something to understand better.
And I think sort of related to this, it's not directly related to cost, but it's something to think about for program implementers is, there were actually a series of case studies that were done a couple of years ago by Advancing Nutrition at 3 countries that had implemented SQ-LNS through their programs. It was Somalia, Honduras, and Niger, I believe. And one of the things that stuck out to me that was both a challenge and a potentially good thing is that some of the programs struggled with managing the caregivers who were coming into the central facility because there was this increased demand. So caregivers were coming in to pick up their SQ-LNS, but the programs had challenges managing that number of people at the facility on the distribution days. And so that's a process that needs to be managed. It could be an inefficiency that, if caregivers are seeing that they have to wait a long time, they may be less inclined to come in as frequently. But it's also a potential opportunity, if the program could be well designed to take advantage of that demand and interest to bundle other services like vaccination delivery or like IYCF counseling or other things. If it could be designed strategically, that's both a challenge but also an opportunity, I think, to gain efficiency, not just for delivery of SQ-LNS, but delivery for health services as a whole that we think are important for children. So I think it's important for us to not just think about the SQ-LNS specific element of efficiency, but the system as a whole. How can things be designed most efficiently?
Absolutely. And the other part of the story, I think, to think about is the broader first 1,000 days target group, which includes all of pregnancy as well, and considering the maternal side of the equation. There's been a lot of progress in scaling up MMS, multiple micronutrient supplements for pregnant women. I would say they're way ahead of where things are for SQ-LNS in large part because the cost of MMS is very affordable. It's a tablet, so it's a very different situation. But the lessons learned there in terms of integrating that with coming in for antenatal care is very important. Will MMS serve as an incentive for women to come in for antenatal care or not? And then how can that best be set up? So we're facing the same exact questions for SQ-LNS for children. We know already that it's an incentive to come in for care. So that part, I think, is well documented. But then handling the increased attendance, as Christine mentioned, by the healthcare providers and community health workers is something that has to be thought about.
Hey, I was wondering if you could take this question from Emily, which is, given the impressive impacts of SQ-LNS on many key nutrition outcomes, has the pace of scaling SQ-LNS been faster or slower than you expected 5 to 10 years ago? Given that you talked about the history and how it was developed with some of the research that you had led in Ghana, how do you view things in terms of the progress that we've made?
Well, 10 years ago, I had no expectations at all. We weren't there yet. We didn't even know what the impact was across different settings. In the last 5 years, I actually think it's been really good progress given how recently this was addressed in WHO guidelines and other key documents. I do think, though, that awareness is still not where it needs to be. And part of the reason we're doing this webinar is to increase the level of awareness. So, for example, most people out there have heard of RUTF. Even members of Congress in the US know what RUTF is. They have no clue about prevention. They don't probably even understand that RUTF is only for treatment or what the difference is between treatment and prevention. So we have a lot of work to do to raise awareness of that. And the other important element is not to pit these products against each other in terms of funding or prioritization. So, for example, whenever the funding for RUTF goes up, producers all scramble to meet that, and then they can't produce SQ-LNS. That has happened in the past, and it's been unfortunate. We hope that with increased production capacity and increased demand, that will be avoided in the future. But there is still the thinking that if we put money into SQ-LNS, it will rob the programs for treatment of money for their objectives. And we certainly do not want to see that happen. We believe that integrating them into combined approaches is the most efficient and most beneficial way to proceed. But we're working hard to document that quantitatively. That's one of the challenges that is still there, is to really get into what are the costs when you integrate prevention and treatment effectively.
If I can build off of one of your points, Kay, about not pitting products against each other, I also think that it's really important for us to say that we're also not trying to pitch SQ-LNS as a magic bullet for child nutrition. We feel very strongly that it is part of a healthy diet for children who are at risk of undernutrition. And so we think that, I think sometimes there's this discussion or perception perhaps that we believe that SQ-LNS should be promoted instead of IYCF counseling or instead of promotion of local foods. But as Kay pointed out, SQ-LNS was intentionally designed to be small so that it's a complement to breastfeeding and the feeding of healthy, nutrient-dense local foods. There's still space in there's still room in the diet that needs to be filled by healthy, nutritious, diverse local foods. And so it's important that we also are thinking about it in terms of the way that it complements those other strategies for maternal, infant, and young child feeding.
Absolutely, and we actually have evidence that when it is used, it can actually enhance uptake of the other recommendations for dietary diversity and for inclusion of animal source foods, for example. So they work hand in hand. And the other part of this that we'd hope to get to in the discussion is, what is the place of products like SQ-LNS within the much bigger picture of healthy diets globally and food systems writ large? So, sometimes people are in sort of different camps. Oh, I'm a healthy food systems person. I don't deal with these nutrition commodities. But in fact, in my view, they really need to be thought of together. So, for example, large-scale food fortification, which includes fortification of staple foods like wheat, rice, and maize with key nutrients. That could be folic acid to prevent neural tube defects, or iron, zinc, iodine, and salt is a critical strategy to reach all populations with nutrients that are often lacking in the diet at a very, very low cost. And in fact, when you apply sort of the cost of a healthy diet calculation, if you don't have any fortified products, that cost of a diet is higher than if you have some of the nutrient needs being met by fortification. So it's a win-win. We can achieve healthier diets that are more affordable at the same time that we're meeting some of these nutrient gaps. Now, large-scale food fortification is a great tool for pregnant women, for populations as a whole, but for children under 2, unfortunately, they don't quite hit the mark because those children don't eat very much of those staple foods. And so we're not getting enough iron and zinc, for example, in them with that strategy. And that's why targeted products for this age group that are fortified with the levels that they need are part of the picture. And again, when you include those in modeling of affordability of diets across different countries, you find that the cost of a diet that meets needs during complementary feeding is way, way lower when you have those products available than when you don't. And the World Food Program has done a wonderful job of illustrating that through a project that they call Fill the Nutrient Gap. And they now have a platform that I'll plug here called Enhance, which allows anyone to go on and insert whatever country or target group or objective that you want, including cost, into the modeling of healthy diets and what can and cannot be achieved and at what cost. So I encourage this audience to explore Enhance to increase awareness of these larger issues. Thank you, Charlotte, for your point.
I was just going to say, if we don't have any more questions, then I think we can start to wrap up. Okay, I don't know if there's any more that you want to get to. And I don't know if my camera is still off.
We're not seeing, there you go.
Okay. Yeah, if there's any more questions that you wanted to get to, I didn't mean to cut in early. But also, this has been a fantastic discussion. Yeah, I was really interested to hear so much about what the task force is doing in order to get those leverage points, as well as some of the best practices that the scaling community really pushes that you're already acting on. So like Johanna said, this having metrics relative to the scale of the problem as opposed to just reach metrics. I think the customization with host countries while also having sort of a framework, so you're not always reinventing the wheel, but you are adapting to individual countries, is addresses one of the main issues in nutrition scale up, which is how diet is so local, which can make really reapplying these interventions quite challenging. And I think another thing that I put in the chat as a question was about how the task force makes the, the whole greater than the sum of the parts. And I think that in nutrition, there's so many actors that can really be one of the major problems, is that the whole is less than the sum of its parts when there isn't coordination. So these were all fantastic points, and I personally learned a lot, and I'm going to encourage the participants to get involved both with us at the scaling community and to the extent that they are able to with you as well. you.